Mercedes-Benz is synonymous with luxury and innovation, one of the world's most iconic car brands, valued at about $80 billion. But before becoming a status symbol, Mercedes' story began quite differently, with a humble engineer, full of doubts and failures, trying to create a horsepower vehicle at a time when it seemed impossible. He proved that everyone was wrong and transformed his small invention into the world's first major automaker in the late 19th century. But this successful trajectory hides a dark chapter. During World War II, Mercedes-Benz benefited from the production of military vehicles to the Nazis, exploring forced labor. So you feel and get ready, because today we will explore the surprising history of Mercedes-Benz and the man who gave life to the car, Carl Benz. Carl Benz was born in November 1844 in the German city of Mühlberg. Born in a low-class house, his father was a locomotive driver who could barely support his family enough to survive. However, when Carl turned 2, his father passed away, leaving him and his mother in financial troubles. Needless to say, Benz's childhood was not easy. But despite living in poverty and going to bed with an empty stomach, his mother has done everything he could to ensure that his son had a good education. Thanks to her, Carl was able to attend school and showed signs of brightness at a very young age, especially in chemistry and mechanics. When he was 15, Carl decided to follow his father's footsteps and passed the mechanical engineering admission exam at the University of Karlsruhe, where he met a teacher who would end up playing a big role in his Rettenbacher Ferdinand. Rettenbacher is considered the main figure who turned the mechanical engineering of a workshop profession into a technical science in Germany, and believed enormously that steam engines, which were mainly used for railways and boats at the time, were rapidly becoming a something of something that were used mainly for railways and boats at the time, were quickly becoming something from the past. Under his teaching, Benz's interest in horses without horses really began to take off. And being an ordinary bicycle knight, he began to move his bike, experiencing possible ways to create a motorized vehicle. Until then, many engineers and inventors had tried to create the first car. And while some of them managed to build self-proposed vehicles, these first inventions were not totally practical. However, Carl realized that most of these early vehicles were based on steam engine technology. And under the guidance of Professor Rettenbacher, he soon realized the need for a totally different concept. While many people initially laughed at his vision, he always believed that it was possible, that he just needed more time to prove it. Thus, after graduating in Karlsruhe at the age of 19, Benz spent the next 37 years working in various engineering and construction jobs. And as he struggled to fit in with any of them, he used everything he learned to start his own venture. In 1871, at the age of 27, Carl partnered with a mechanic named August Ritter, and together began to operate iron and mechanical workshop in Mannheim. At that time, Benz continued to work on his parallel project, trying to develop a motorized car, so having a partner to help him manage the business seemed essential. Unfortunately, however, for Carl, his business partner was not reliable, and after his tools were seized by local authorities, his company fought immensely during his first year. Fortunately, Carl also met a woman at that time, Bertha Ringer, who would become his wife a few years later. Born in a rich family, Bertha was a woman of strength, strong values, and couldn't stand to see her fiancé's efforts being wasted by her business partner. So she decided to use her own dowry to buy the entire part of the Ritter company, putting her and Carl in full business control. Together, they were able to change the situation and keep business to light over the next 10 years. Despite all the struggles, it was during this period that Carl was able to show his true genius, making great developments and advances in his secondary experiments, mainly developing a 2-stroke gasoline engine. In 1879, for more revenue, he also began patenting his inventions, such as his engine speed regulation system, ignition through a battery system, ignition candle, carburetor, clutch, change of gear, and a radiator water. With these projects, Carl was not just approaching his dream of a horsepower carriage, but also allowed him to add more products he could sell from his business. However, the business was not going as well as he expected. You see, the production costs of Carl's venture had increased so much, the banks demanded that it be incorporated. This forced him to associate with other investors and eventually turn his business into a joint company in 1882. In the end, Carl got only 5% of his company's shares and therefore was relegated from his position. To make matters worse, its ideas were no longer taken into account when the company designed new products. In fact, he had no voice in the company. Frustrated and hurt by this arrangement, Carl arranged his things and left the corporation the following year. Leaving his company was a hard blow to Carl, but disappointment made him even more determined to be successful. His longtime passion for bicycles would take him to Max Rose and Friedrich Wilhelm, two men who had a bicycle workshop in Mannheim. Together, they established Benz and C and focused on the manufacture of industrial machines and stationary gas engines. Unlike Carl's previous venture, it started very well and became quite profitable in a short period of time. With constant income entering and a 25-person team, Benz finally drove his main focus to his dream throughout his life, building a car using his gas engine. Instead of simply adding an engine to a carriage car, Carl built the car around the engine. And using technology similar to a bicycle, he built what many considered the first true car in 1885, Benz patent Motorwagen. This two-seater vehicle operated on three-wire wheels forming a tricycle and was fed by a 4N gasoline engine. Its cylinder engine produced 2/3 of a power and could reach about 7 miles per hour. Benz knew this was revolutionary, and after testing and refining his vehicle, he took his wondering to the public in the summer of 1886. However, he received mixed criticism from critics. While some admired their creation, most people were skeptical about the machine, and many did not want him to drive on the main streets for fear that the vehicle could explode. Others were even convinced that Benz was the devil driving infernal transportation. Carl's business partners were not very happy about it either. His obsession with the car kept him away from his work, and they could not see how their invention could be useful. Why would anyone buy such a machine? They argued. It is no faster than a horse. It can brake easily and can run out of fuel. However, Carl Benz was convinced that his horsepower carriage was the future and began making cars for sale in 1888, the first person in the world to do so. His greatest supporter was his wife, who used to stay with her husband in the workshop, offering him new suggestions. But even after adding improvements, people could not yet see Carl's vision. On the other hand, the few people who bought cars could only use them to cover short distances. And even with that, they needed mechanics to be with them all the time. Nor did he help, they were very expensive, leaving them accessible only to the rich and elite. And even many members of the so-called elite did not like them because they were so noisy and messy. With that said, it was one thing that Carl needed to convince the world that the car was here to stay. One morning in the summer of 1888, Bertha Benz woke up very early, while Carl was still in bed, and jumped in her husband's car to board one of the most important journeys in car history. She brought her 2 children and left to visit her mother in Pforzheim, which was 66 kilometers from Mannheim. Bertha did not report her husband or police about her plans, probably because if they knew, they would not let her go. At the time, no car or motorized car had already tried a journey for so long, but she was determined to prove the importance of Benz's invention. However, his trip was not a walk in the park. Bertha has encountered many problems along the way, such as crossing dusty and stony roads that were made for horses, having to stop in a pharmacy to get more gas, and even have to perform some mechanical repairs. The 66-mile trip took Bertha and her 2 children for more than 12 hours, but eventually everyone arrived in Pforzheim safely. More than anything, the trip has achieved the goal that Bertha set out to achieve, to make people realize that the car was the next big news. With this, Benz Motorwagen became the subject of the city and received great publicity for Carl's business. Soon, Benzensi C began to expand quickly, so much so that in 1890 it became the second largest engine manufacturer in Germany, although not selling its cars but its stationary gasoline engines. But with the addition of 2 new business partners, Friedrich von Fischer and Julius Ganz, they would soon help change that. While they took care of the commercial and marketing side of things, Benz could focus more on his engineering objectives and was able to patent various car innovations, such as the transmission of planetary equipment, the double pivot steering, and the flat engine with a boxer configuration. He also designed and manufactured a new and enhanced car on the recommendation of his business partners, who hit the market in 1893. He called Benz Victoria. This was a vehicle of two more luxurious passengers, which comes with a 3-powered engine capable of reaching 18 kilometers per hour. Thanks to its reliability, the vehicle was sold reasonably well, but it was its follow-up design, the cheapest Benz Velo, which really took off. With a total production of about 1,200 units, Benz Velo became the world's first large-scale production car in history, making it Benz and C the largest car company in the world. During the 1890s and early 1900s, however, while the company Benz was enjoying its new success, it was also feeling a lot of pressure from another company that was parked not far. Daimler Motoren Gesellschaft. Daimler Motoren Gesellschaft was headed by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach. Both were brilliant engineers, but Gottlieb Daimler in particular was known to be very competitive and had many connections and knowledge of how to manage a business, knowledge that Carl Benz seemed to have not. Daimler's first commercially sold in 1892. 2 years later, they followed with a 2-cylinder car and in 1897 introduced their first front-engine model, the Daimler Phoenix. It was clear that Daimler was reaching Benz as its vehicles looked more attractive and comfortable to the public. Unfortunately, Daimler passed away in 1900, leaving Maybach in charge of the company. But it was under Maybach's control that he projected his achievement, Mercedes 35 horsepower, in 1901. What makes this vehicle so special is that it was the first car to look like our modern idea of a car. It was equipped with a powerful gas engine, the body was wider and larger, with a custom steel chassis, and its central mass was close to the floor. Initially built for the races, this vehicle was made at the request of a rich businessman, Emil Jelinek, who decided to appoint the car after his daughter, Mercedes. This car would overcome several street races and hill climbing events, going at a top speed of 80 kilometers per hour, higher than any other vehicle of your day. This drew a lot of attention to the company Daimler, which decided to rename all its vehicles to Mercedes and started producing new models for running in public use of the same name. On the other hand, however, this new trend did not fit well on Carl Benz's partners, who wanted an immediate response. To combat the competition, they brought some French designers to help with a faster new model, without Carl's approval. Benz was angry and upset about their decision. He never liked the idea of automatic races and always preferred to drive slowly and carefully. He was horrified by the noise and danger of someone driving at high speed on public roads. The car built by his team was not a success either, and this became harmful to Benz company, who suffered more crises between 1903 and 1904. Annoyed and disappointed, Carl decided to leave his company while still on his board. In the end, he agreed to allow his cars to run and ended up being these racing hits that ended up rescuing his company. In 1908, Benz had a power pilot of 120 horsepower, a monster who roared from Leningrad to Moscow in 8.5 hours with an average speed of 80 kilometers per hour, which was an incredible feat, considering how primitive the one's tracks were at the time. But it was the Blitz in the folds of 200 horsepower that would end up putting the brand featured. Built in 1909, this race car would break the absolute speed record made by any aircraft, train, or car of the time, reaching more than 140 miles per hour in 1911. This put Benz alongside Daimler as one of the most desired cars in time, and the two companies enjoyed good sales in the following years. However, this success was shortly lasted as World War I hatched, shaking everyone's life as well as the global economy. After Germany's defeat in World War I, the country underwent an economic recession, and the two companies, Daimler and Benz, ended up fighting immensely. To strengthen their survival possibilities, the two companies prevent their rivalry and signed an agreement in 1924, in which they agreed to combine their production and marketing efforts, maintaining their individual names to save costs. But this agreement lasted only 2 years, as the German economy got worse and the two companies were forced to merge completely in 1926, creating a new company called Daimler-Benz. Under Daimler-Benz, the company renamed its vehicles as Mercedes-Benz and launched several impressive models during the late 1920s, such as Mercedes-Benz Type 630 and SSS and SSK models. One of his best and brightest engineers who helped develop these vehicles was Ferdinand Porsche, whose name would later become quite famous in the auto industry. As for Karl, he remained in Daimler-Benz's board of directors and managed to see the success of his cars and marvel at how far the auto industry had come in his life. Karl Benz died just a few years after the company's merger, and in April 1929, at the age of 84. After his death, the company continued to grow in size and strength, becoming one of the best automakers in the world. But he enjoyed some of his best years under Adolf's unlikely leadership. When Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, he wanted to show German engineering and technology to the world, hoping to raise his political point of view above those of his contemporaries. One way for him to decide to impress the world was showing German cars and sports to international engines. Almost immediately, he provided a major subsidy to Daimler-Benz to get involved in prize races. No other car company of that time would spend as long and money by building cars as fast as Daimler-Benz, and this fact became evident on the track. From 1934 to 1939, Mercedes dominated the Grand Prix races, driving as fast as 200 miles per hour with its W25 and W125 models. However, they were also challenged by a new rival, Auto Union, another German automaker sponsored by their own country. Auto Union would also have its fair part of success during the same period, winning 25 races from 1935 to 1937. These successes placed Germany at the top of the world with motor racing events, especially Mercedes-Benz, which even became the car brand Hitler's favorites. In fact, one of the cars he was frequently free was Mercedes-Benz 770, a large luxury vehicle used mainly by high-ranking Nazi politicians and other Axis staff. However, with the outbreak of World War II in 1939, Daimler-Benz company would soon be at serious risk. As the demand for civilian passenger cars became scarce, they began to manufacture military vehicles, submarines, tanks, and aircraft engines to the Nazi military. His largest line of business were military trucks capable of transporting 3 to 6.5 tons of supplies. In 1942, they stopped producing public cars completely, as all their resources were directed to the war effort. And as the war increased, new employees were needed to deal with the increase in weaponry production. As the whole workforce was now fighting on the front line, Daimler-Benz began recruiting women to accompany the necessary unit volumes. However, this was not yet sufficient to meet the demand, so the company resorted to the use of forced labor. These prisoners of war, kidnapped civilians, and detained from concentration camps were housed near the plants and forced to work long hours under immense pressure from the Germans. Most of these workers were from Eastern Europe that was hospitalized in barracks with bad imprisonment environments, while the detainees of concentration camps were monitored by SS under inhuman living conditions. Many people died in these fields of severe malnutrition, bad tracks, or even torture. And in 1944, almost half of all 63,000 Daimler-Benz employees were forced workers. When the war ended in 1945, the company had a great success. Because of the Potsdam contract, all German assets abroad were confiscated and used to pay repairs. This led Daimler-Benz to lose all his subsidiaries, affiliates, and foreign branches, and they were removed back to their own plants in their home country. In other words, they had to start all over again and recover again. Daimler-Benz was then restructured and had to deny his high management. Due to these drastic changes, the company was able to obtain a permission to produce from the American occupation authorities in 1946. Although its factory has suffered serious damage to bombs, Mercedes-Benz still had the advantage of having its own plant, as many other competitors as BMW or Adler lost vision when they ended up in Soviet territory. Mercedes-Benz company has focused its efforts on ambulance production, police patrol vehicles, and delivery vans based on 170-volt models, and used one of its plants as a repair installation for U.S. military transport. In 1947, they returned to the production of passenger vehicles, with only 1,045 of their 170V models being produced throughout the year. But even under these conditions less than ideal, Daimler-Benz still managed to make a profit just a year later. In the 1950s, Mercedes-Benz was able to recover much of its influence, making a strong return on motorsports events, as well as achieving successful sales worldwide. So much so that in 1954, the company had already profited with $1 billion. Over the years, Mercedes has completely changed its image and has become one of the most valuable car brands in the world. However, none of this would have been possible without Carl Benz, who, despite his humble context, challenges and critics, had the courage and determination to transform his dream into reality. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and please don't forget to like and subscribe. Until then, I see you next.